The Pulsar 9000. This is a weapon I haven't talked about in over a year, and it wasn't even its own video. I talked about it in the Woofer video. Now, I might have talked about it in like the best shotguns video and the tier list recently, which I'm going to be talking about throughout this video, but more importantly, I haven't talked about it in its own video since 2019, which is essentially right when it came out, and the weapon has experienced basically no changes. It got a slight damage buff, but I wanted to take a second look at it because of said tier list. Now, that was uploaded recently, and it won't be the focus of this entire video, but I, in that tier list and in the past, have ranked this weapon A tier instead of S tier, and that seems to upset a lot of people. So, we're going to talk about the pros of the Pulsar 9000 and its insane crowd clearing, and, well, the cons with some of its single target damage. Now, you could honestly probably click off the video there, but I really want to get into the nitty and gritty with this weapon, and that's why I've dedicated its own video to it, and I feel like I haven't done it enough justice in the past. So, before we get too far into it, I want to state, for the record, a tier list is just for fun. Alright, you know, I'm remaking this video because of this own weapon's merit, but I wanted to really reiterate that no matter what I say throughout this video, the Pulsar 9000 is a phenomenal weapon. There are few weapons in the game that are better for crowd clearing than the Pulsar 9000, and it's a shotgun that is now actually more accessible than usual. If you check out the Llama Shop right here, you can see we cannot spend V-Bucks anymore, meaning when or if the Sci Fi llamas come around, I will announce them in my daily videos, you know, subscribe to stay tuned for those, but also, you won't have to gamble your V-Bucks away. And while I don't 100% recommend vouchering this weapon straight up because there are lots of options, you can, and it's not honestly a bad pick. So this one is up to you. I cannot say with certainty that it is absolutely worth a voucher. It depends on how many vouchers you have, how long you've been playing, whether or not the Sci-Fi llamas might come around. We haven't seen them in a while as of recording, so that might be a factor. There are a lot of things to consider, and I do have an entire video on how to spend your vouchers linked down below. But if you like what you see from this video, it's only locked to energy, so you're not going to need multiple copies of this weapon, and there are only really a couple of 6 perks that are super good with it, so it's not like you're going to need more than 2 copies tops. So, well, with all that said, let's get into the gameplay, and I want to talk about the pros first. This weapon, as you may know, just deletes crowds of enemies. It is a really, really well-balanced weapon where its damage is kind of low, and it doesn't crit for a ton, so you're almost always kind of doing the same amount, and it's pretty consistent to use, and you can always fire a second shot. That's not always fantastic because it is using 4 energy cells per shot, but I said I'd stick to the positives initially, so let's get that over with. So obviously it's really good at going through hordes of enemies. That is basically it, and most of the enemies in the game are going to be in hordes. There are of course mist monsters that spawn with encampments and in the defense, and mini bosses exist and smashers exist, and we'll get to them later, but for the basic zombies it is really, really good for encampment clearing up to an extent. We'll get to that later, but that's kind of the crux of this weapon. Even like a riot husky, you can always jump over top or try to get an angle on it. Even the regular, more traditional shotguns like a ground pounder or a huskbuster are still going to have issues with those huskies, and you're going to have to jump over top and get a little creative. Now, for the downsides, I will mention a couple of big things. So, shield or husks do block the Pulsar 9000, and some of you might think that it's not fair to count that as a negative because, yeah, it blocks some of the better shotguns in the game as well. What gives? Well, because you're shooting an expensive, slow-firing projectile, you need to get up inside the shielder and try to hit it that way, and if you get unlucky with that encampment with a bunch of riot huskies, and it's not even just the encampment, these do spawn normally in regular mission defenses. This is something you will encounter. This weapon has a very hard time dealing with that, and it's because of the slow firing projectile that is less accurate. I'm comparing this weapon for reference to weapons like the ground pounder, which is indicative of a basic shotgun. The ground pounder is like many shotguns where it's shooting a bullet hit scan projectile. For those of you who don't play FPS games, hit scan means it just hits instantly. There is no projectile, there is no wait time. As soon as you click, the enemy gets hit, and there is a spread of pellets which can go through a riot husky. It can be more specific. It doesn't get stopped by a rock like the ring does, and it's a lot less expensive than 4 energy cells per shot. So when people kind of get mad at me because I never like to rank this weapon S tier, this is why. It's expensive, and it does have important drawbacks that a lot of people like to ignore. And I just think in the scope of a game like Fortnite Save the World, anything in the S tier, this goes for every tier list I've ever made, should be weapons that can do it all. And the Pulsar kind of just falls flat in a couple of these areas. Now, furthermore, it is also pretty bad for single target damage. I hinted at this earlier, but I do have a couple of clips of smashers that really show that this weapon struggles. It is not a miss monster killer. It is not a mini boss killer. It can crit and do really good damage against regular blasters, takers. If it gets a couple of lucky crits, maybe you got a war cry active, which is something that happens in a regular mission. I try to refrain from war cries a little bit in my videos because I want to show even basic gameplay. That's why I am always solo. That's why I use consistent loadouts. I know you guys don't always like me using blast from the past all the time, but it gives you a consistent overview, and this weapon does benefit from totally rocking out a little bit. But I also wanted to mention that I just like to be fair and not use war cries. But with war cries and all that, you can two-shot a miss monster and it can be very good, but against a mini boss, you're gonna want to pull out one of the classics, you know, the Huskbuster, Tiger Jaw, Ground Pounder, etc, etc, etc. But the Pulsar is just gonna fall flat there. So that's kind of the whole perspective of the Pulsar 9000. With all of that said, let's get to the actual perks. Many of you who have been watching this series for a long time know that the best perks videos are more of just an excuse to talk about a weapon and its pros and cons rather than the actual specific perks, because I think everybody kind of knew what perks we were going to be running on this, but I do want to dig into it a little bit. First and foremost, these are the best perks. If you want to click away, I appreciate you hanging out, but let me get into the exact specifics. So you're going to want a decent amount of damage. That's why we have a damage perk on it, of course. And there's not really any use in running crit rating. There is a thing called diminishing returns where one crit rating perk brings us from 10% up to 38%. That is a 27% jump. You can see the second crit rating brings us up 13%, and that does affect our damage output. A damage perk here is going to be, in the end, more damage than a second crit rating. I know you might want to crit more often and lean into this 6 perk a little bit. Maybe you want to put Buckshot Raptor in the lead. I usually do the math on these weapons without a loadout altogether, and double crit rating always falls short. So Buckshot Raptor might pick up the slack in the lead, but I think a damage perk is the universal perk to go for. I can never recommend double crit rating. It's usually just not the right way to go. As for the reload perk, you absolutely want it, unless for one special situation. Chaos Agent does work with the Pulsar 9000. When he first released, he did not. So if you got that in your head that he doesn't work, I don't blame you. I didn't think it would work either, but I actually tested the clip and it does work. For those of you who don't know Chaos Agent, basically if you use an ability, he will instantly reload your weapon. By the way, this is the loadout I've been using. I showed it on screen a couple of times, but yeah, Chaos Agent can help a little bit, but the Pulsar 9000 really only has 5 shots before reloading, and there is no way to extend that, so you might be better off with just a regular reload perk. That said, I did have my double damage copy from when I was testing with Chaos Agent, and it didn't feel that bad. So if you're somebody who doesn't feel like they need that reload perk, double damage might be a better way to go. You will get more damage output, but you might be a little less versatile in your fights. As for the crit build, it is obviously a thing here. I know you can run triple crit rating on this, but please don't. It's not worth it. The 6 perk is not that much damage. Crit build is basically this is the way to go. I ran it with triple damage. I put it through the math. It's, you know, slightly less DPS. It's more consistent, but you won't have those nice big crit hits that will be necessary if you don't intend on switching out against a smasher or a miss monster. If you want to keep using the Pulsar on those bigger targets, a crit build will come in handy for sure. Element of course is locked to energy, and then for the 6 perk, you do have a couple of options. So each shot granting crit rating is kind of nice for like an SMG or an AR, but you're not going to be able to possibly get the stacks 15 times with this, so it's kind of an ignorable perk. And the crit causing 7 projectiles is nice. That's the one I have on it, but they have kind of quietly buffed the expanding ring of damage, and it does over 100,000 damage in the high end zone, so it's really good. Either way, you're good. I don't recommend a core perk. If you've got 19 like I do, I personally prefer the ring, and I'm honestly just gonna own up to it right there. I prefer the ring of damage because it's a little cleaner, more consistent. The 7 projectiles kind of goes off in directions that you can't really control or rely on, more importantly, and it does set off propane. So if you don't want to blow up your own tunnels, I recommend the ring, but it truly doesn't matter. Do not spend your last core perk on this unless you seriously want that. It's just not that serious. And that's it for the Pulsar 9000. I hope that cleared things up. I hope you guys learned a little bit more about this weapon. I really enjoy a lot of shotguns in this game. This one has always fallen flat because it is a slow expanding ring. It's not super precise. I like to hit my shots and aim for the head, and this doesn't really have a headshot bonus. It's super expensive to operate, so I've never seriously valued it as an absolute top threat. But like I said in the beginning of this video, don't let that fool you. This weapon is fantastic. If you guys want to support the channel, feel free to use code Mista to check out. I seriously appreciate it. These videos take more work than you know. I'll see you guys in the next one, and take it easy. And then